And we're synced. Hey, what's up? Jacob here to walk you through the files for the D-lighting and Compify tutorial. So thanks for downloading them. Let's get into it so that you can kind of understand what's going on across these different VFX shots. So you should have downloaded 4 different zip files. There's 3 VFX shots, and then 1 zip file contains some ACES color management files that we need to use. If you've never set up ACES color management in Blender, and I'm not talking about the default ACES stuff, you need to set it up specially, then do this. You're gonna take these files in the ACES folder, and what we wanna do is go to your applications. I'm doing this for Mac, but it should be similar for Windows. You can see I have way too many Blender installs, don't ask, but just duplicate whatever version you're on, and then you can rename the duplicate something like ACES. Great, I already have one, as you can see. Then you'll go into the package contents, resources, click the version number, data files, color management, then just get rid of these files here, and you're going to replace those in the color management file with these. Oh, that did not work. Gotta click in here, paste. So I have the ACES files in the color management folder. The way that you're gonna know that that worked is by opening Blender here, and then in the, what is this? The render properties tab, all the way at the bottom under color management, you should see in the sequencer, you should have these different options here. And you might notice this is a smaller list than usual. And the default ACES configuration has like hundreds of options here. And I kind of pared them down to be a little bit more manageable. So don't worry if you're not seeing all the regular options. These are the ones you should need most of the time. But once we're set up with that, you're good to go. I want to get into each of these files that I've provided for you just to kind of talk mainly about how I've set everything up for rendering and compositing, because it's a little bit different depending on the VFX shot. So let's start with Arches Abstract. And this is the main shot from the tutorial. And you can see if we just go right into rendered view again, things just work. This is the beauty of viewport compositing, and you can just play around. By the way, if with any of these files you make something yourself, definitely put it on social media or just send it to me privately. I would love to see it. Yeah, just have fun with these files and make something cool. So the way I set this up for rendering was I pretty much rendered this all together. The only special setup I did was I enabled in this render passes tab, actually it's the view layer tab. In these light passes, I enabled the emission render pass, which you can view any render pass up here, and we can just look at the emission pass. And that's just giving us all the light information from any objects that have an emission material on them. So if I duplicated this, you could see that this is what the emission pass is holding. So let's go over to the compositing tab. In each file, the compositing is done in the compositing tab, so you can look there. Also for each file, I've provided you with all the rendered CGI elements. So if you just want to focus on, playing with the compositing, you don't have to worry about rendering things out. So if I Control Shift and click here, I can see this is my overall combined render pass, and then we have the emission pass. And I've just run the emission pass through 2 glare nodes to create a glow effect. And then I've added a mix color node, and I've set it to add, and that's what this is right here. And I've just added the glow on top of the combined render pass. And so that just gives me, that just allows that sphere to glow a little bit. And then this factor just controls how much glow we're seeing. So I can crank that up to full 100%, or I can kind of find a nice middle ground there. And yeah, that's a pretty straightforward setup. Let's go into the next file. And this is Arch's Mystery. Now, this is the same scene, and I showed this in the tutorial as well, but this has a little bit more of a mysterious, dark vibe to it. And if in this world shader, we can just press M to unmute this volume scatter node, and that gives us some really cool volumetrics in this scene. But I'm gonna turn that off for now. And again, just have fun playing around with this. There's really no render setup here. You can see the compositing is nothing pretty much. And that's just because I really didn't make a final render of this shot. I just rendered a single frame. But hey, go ahead, render the full thing out. And again, share it with me. I'd love to see what you make. Next, we have the Rebels shot. And this one is called Rebels mainly because of, that graffiti there. The main thing I want to talk about in this shot is, well, first off, this Compify material is, I'm not using Ian's official Compify node group. I'm just using the simplified version that I showed initially in the tutorial. So we can see we have our footage and then the delit version, so regular, delit, and then that goes through the diffuse BSDF there. And let's go into rendered view. And you'll notice we're not really seeing any of that geometry anymore. And that's because for this shot, I set all of these objects to be shadow catchers. So by default, they look like this, right? We can see everything. But I selected all the footage geometry, came into the Object Properties tab under Visibility, enable Shadow Catcher, right-click, copy to selected to make them all shadow catchers. Then in the View Layer tab, I enabled the Shadow Catcher Render Pass, and again, we can see what that looks like right in the viewport. And what that Shadow Catcher is doing is it's going to capture the information for both the shadows, but also the light that is being cast by the TVs. And so the reason this looks like it does is that pretty much anywhere here in this image where there's no shadows or light being captured, the value of this image is 1. Anywhere that there are shadows, the value of the pixel value is going to be below 1. And then anywhere that there's light being captured, that these pixel values will probably be somewhere above 1. So if we go into compositing, we have the shadow catcher pass here. Again, this is the rendered elements that I provided for you. And I've just scaled that up times 2. And Blender does a weird thing where it's cutting off that scale element, but it still works. And I'm scaling this because I rendered the CGI elements at in HD, 1920 by 1080, and my footage is 4K. And I find that it just saves on render time and file size to render at half resolution and scale up. That loss of detail really isn't a problem. If anything, it just makes the CGI fit into the footage better because the footage isn't perfectly sharp either. So then the way we use the shadow pass is we simply multiply it by the background footage. So again, this is another mixed color node, but this time it's set to multiply. And we put the footage in one slot and the shadow catcher in the other. And when we multiply them together, again, anywhere where that shadow catcher has negative values, it's going to darken the footage. Anywhere where not negative values, but values below 1, it's going to darken the footage. Anywhere where those values are above 1, it's going to brighten the footage so we can see the light casting from the TVs. And then anywhere where the shadow catcher is 1 exactly, you can see there's no change when we multiply it, because when you multiply any number by 1, it's just that number unchanged. The identity property, I think, if I'm remembering my math class. Anyway, so that's the shadow catcher, which we add first, and then we just have an alpha over node to put the CGI elements on top. And anytime you're adding stuff on top, just the stuff that goes on top has to go on the bottom input. It's kind of confusing that way, but that's the way it works. So that's this file. Again, we could add a little glow to these screens if we add a glare node. I'm just going to plug the overall image. You don't always have to render out just the emission pass. You can add a glare to the overall render, which I'll do right here. I'll change this again to fog glow. I'll change the quality to low, and then the size all the way up. Now, one thing that's kind of important to know about the glare node is this mix factor. And if we hover over, we can see -1 is the original image. So if we go to -1, we just get the original image, no glare. 0 is a 50-50 mix of glow and original image. But we want just the glow because we already have composited this image on top. So we go to 1 just for the glow. And then what we can do is we'll duplicate this mix color node. We'll set it to add because we always want to be adding glows. And then, we need to scale this up. Boom. And then again, we can use that factor slider to set this kind of at a reasonable level. And there you go. We have our screens glowing a bit. That's probably a little bit too much even. We wanted it to be kind of subtle. I did not add the glow here in compositing, actually. I rendered this shot out and I brought it into DaVinci Resolve, and I added the final color grading and glow in DaVinci Resolve. Okay, our final shot is the river stairs shot. Now this one is a little bit different in the way that I've set up this Compify material. You can see it looks a little bit crazy, but let me just explain this real quick. Let me turn off the VFX elements and we'll go into the material preview. So per usual, up here at the top, if I click this in preview, this is just the footage being projected onto our geometry. But one thing that you'll see in this shot, and that you might run into this depending on how much your camera moves, is that, of course, anywhere that the camera can actually see, that's in the camera's field of view. By the way, Compify has this feathered square node group. And if I view this, this just gives us a mask of anywhere that the camera can see. So anywhere in the camera's field of view, obviously the projection is going to look decent. But then it gets pretty crazy outside of the camera's field of view. So for this shot in particular, I didn't want that. I wanted to kind of clean up all the areas outside of the camera's field of view. So what I did is, this is our camera with the motion tracking data, or the 3D camera tracking data on it. And I want to just freeze this camera at different points throughout this shot. So I'm going to duplicate the camera, and in this duplicate, I'll just hit constrain to F curve here. This is in the constraints tab. And this gives us the actual keyframes for our camera movement. And then let's say I want to just freeze this at frame 0. I'll click on that keyframe, plus press Command I to invert that selection, and then I'll just delete all the other keyframes. And you'll see what that does is that just freezes this camera there. And then what I can do is I go back into the material. Actually, first I'll click on this camera and I'll just call it camera for F0 for frame 0. And then I'll go into the camera properties tab all the way to the bottom. And again, Compify has this new camera project node group button that I can hit. And what this does is, back in the material, I can add a group called camera project camera F0. That's the camera we want. And if I view this, now we see that this camera is just projecting a UV map only from frame 0, and it's not moving at all, which is good. Then all we have to do is find frame 0 of our footage, which I already have here. And then we just use this UV map in this input. And this essentially gives us a freeze projection, or like a frozen projection from frame 0. And so what I did is I did that same thing for frame 0, frame 100, and then a later frame in the shot. And then I blended all of these together. You can see these different mix nodes. And I made this mask to mask out the different areas, kind of wherever these frames looked best. And there's kind of this tangle of mix nodes that mixes them together. And then I've put the actual projected footage on top using just this feathered square mask. So all that gets fed into the Compify footage node group, and that's kind of how that's set up. Sorry, I'm not going to go into more detail about that, but hopefully that clears that up a little bit more. Again, with this shot, let's go into the camera's view. Let's turn back on our footage lights and VFX elements. One thing you'll notice, well, let's just talk about the render setup here. If we go into rendered view again, I've set all of the footage geometry to be shadow catchers, just like that. And in the view layer tab, again, we've enabled the shadow catcher render pass. Another thing that you'll see in the composite is we want to, again, add some, we've got these cables here that have this light that kind of pulses through them. And we want to have a bit of glow just on that light source. And so that required another render pass. But this time, unlike the Arches abstract shot where we were able to isolate that light source with the emission pass, we can't do that here because even though we're using an emission material, that light is passing through a transparent material. And so the Cycles render engine is not going to categorize that light as in the emission pass, but it's going to categorize it in the transmission render pass because it's light that's transmitting through a material. And so that's why I've enabled the transmission direct render pass, which again, we can confirm that that's the right one by just live in the viewport selecting transmission direct. And you can see that gives us just this light information that we want. And so again, in the compositing tab is where you'll find all the compositing goodness. Here's the CGI rendered elements. Here's our footage. Just like before, we have the shadow catcher that's being multiplied on top. Then we have the main elements just put on top with the alpha over node. And then the glow added. This time, the glow, I treated this a little bit differently. This is these first two dilate and erode nodes essentially take away just a bit of this noise from this render pass. You can see if I turn them on and off, it's just kind of cleaning that up just a little bit. And then again, going through a couple glare nodes to create the glow. And then finally, we add that on top. Again, using the factor as a way to control how much glow is showing up. All right. Well, yeah, we'll catch you in the next video. Peace.